the top talents in the comic book business are here to tell everything they know.
Thank you. Yeah, it's probably one of the things that have been most consistent in my life is comic books. You know, as a kid, my family used to go to this place called Collingswood Auction, and it sold all kinds of stuff, plants, socks. But I was really attracted to this place that sold books, magazines, and then this interesting interplay between words and pictures. It just entranced me. And even before my formal collecting days, I was zipping through these things called comic books, and I just loved them from the start.
What age were you?
I think I enjoyed comics before I formally became a collector, probably since the age of 5 or 6.
Wow.
So we're probably going back to 1966. But I'm a kid, just sort of candidly, I went to one school system, and I think I got a little behind when I moved to another, and I really got left back in first grade. So it was around that age that I started learning to read and using comics to learn how to read and get caught up. And, I think I got left back in first grade, but then began at the back of the pack, but became obsessed with reading and really loved it. And, ripped through all my courses, and comics helped that as well.
Yeah. Well, specifically one comic, that being Captain America 176, this beautiful Sal Buscema, Steve Englehart book that you have in your hand right there.
Yep. This is the actual comic. I grew up in a small beach town called Long Branch, New Jersey, and we used to have comics sold at pharmacies or 7-Elevens. Yep. And I distinctly remember, I was still trying to track down through some old friends the actual name of the pharmacy, but it was on a road called Bath Avenue. And there was a spinner rack, and for whatever reason, this very striking image really compelled me. So this is the era of the 25-cent comic. Now, I had gotten comics like Man-Thing #1, which was a 20-center, but this book is the formal beginning of saying, you know what, I'm going to keep coming back and getting this. And, while I'm getting this one, why don't I get that one and that one and that one and that one? And so it was July of 1974. This actual book is the one that started it. And definitely a compelling image, a compelling story, and kind of an interesting time to start reading Captain America, because in this issue, Steve Rogers becomes disgusted by something he learns and quits being Captain America. So for my next year of reading Cap, he's a man without a country, beautiful Sal Buscema art, phenomenal. That's Artie Semick inks, and Englehart, a great era of the book. And he eventually becomes Nomad, the man without a country. But this book started the ride. And I definitely fell in love with Cap in particular. Now, a friend of my sister's was dating a guy who was in college, and he had great runs of books like Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Iron Man. And I started reading all that stuff as well. And it was I was reading a sequence, maybe starting Spidey 105 to 121, that amazing era. So that kind of got me to be a Marvelite. But not long thereafter, I discovered a man named Jack Kirby was a guy behind stuff like the Fantastic Four. And I followed him over to his adventures over at DC. And then would actually, as a collector, began to go back in time and learn that he did a thing called Fourth World at DC Comics, New Gods, Mr. Miracle, Forever People, Jimmy Olsen, that kind of stuff. And The Demon, The Losers. He did a lot of great stuff. I mean, we could get into this a little more. But
it's
the
pretty
answer to your
interesting.
Simple question.
It's pretty interesting, yeah. The
what's
Captain
very
America stuff.
interesting about it with you is you seem to have gravitated to the creators as well, which most young kids, I'll be honest with you, when I started in 1982, I didn't even, of course I was with Jack Kirby in 1982. I didn't even understand the significance for 20 years. So 20 years later, I'm starting to say, oh my gosh, Frank Miller and George Perez, and oh my gosh, how did you gravitate to the creators so early?
Well, even as a kid at the auction, I would get these books that may or may not have covers, and I could see right off the bat that there were different art styles with different varying amounts of energy in them. And I instantaneously became attracted to Kirby. And Kirby's work was all over the Marvel comics of the day, whether it be Fantastic Four, Thor, or others. Something very compelling and energetic and emotional about his stuff that I loved. Now, candidly, I liked Captain America more than at the time I liked Sal Buscema's artwork. As the years have gone on, I've really kind of swung around and kind of realized the genius of not only Sal, but certainly of his brother John as well.
Yeah.
But I want to stop for a second and just contextualize tonight's conversation. This is a celebration of my 50 years of collecting, but I've actually asked a number of friends who are to come on who are fellow comics professionals who collect comics, because not all of us do, and to talk about those books and why they love them and they adore them. But yeah, so Jesse James, I could, as a young kid, I can tell when Gene Colan drew Captain America. I could tell the differences in the art and in the quality. And that led me to start going after the names. Oh, if this person did this, did that carry over? So for example, by reading Fantastic Four, Lee Kirby Fantastic Four made me gravitate towards Thor because they had a really crazy run. Like, I was wondering when that first Thor movie came on board, how would they deal with the fact that these were Asgardian gods, but they were also space gods that embraced super science? Like, how do you make all that work? And they did it in like 1 or 2 lines. But that's really what I loved about the Kirby Lee run on Thor, that it could have Galactus in it or villains like the Wrecker. So yeah, I gravitated towards the talent really early on. And certainly as soon as I became college age in the 80s, I was living in New York. My LCS, my local comic shop, was Forbidden Planet. Wow. So we would be spoiled with signings, Chris Claremont, Frank Miller, Clive Barker. And those people's work became very recognizable. Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons, etc.
Yeah. My first comic book was also a Captain America book, Brian. It was,
wow.
It was this book right here, Captain America and the Campbell Kids. And
that's a great one.
And the reason why is because my dad worked for Campbell Soup for 30 years. My grandfather worked for Campbell Soup for 30 years. So I grew up a Campbell Soup kid, as they call us. And it was a promo book that my dad had boxes of. And he, of course, gave me and my brother one, and my brother trashed his, but I kept mine all nice, and eventually I got it signed. I even had Herb Trimp, who did the interior work, sign it. So, yeah, man, I feel you on the Captain America stuff. Jesse, I think yours was a Avengers book?
Well, no. So I have before I go into mine, and I've asked a couple people about this on that spinner rack. Was that like your spinner rack? We seem to have ownership went back in the days of this is my space, this is my spinner rack. How dare you bend those books to look at what the book is behind it? Tell us about the experience of shopping on a spinner rack, because I think this generation can't understand that.
So back in the day, mid 70s up to early 80s, some of the best ways to get comics were at spinner racks. These are racks that were circular and had a very small imprint in a given shop, maybe a grand total of 18 inches in diameter. So it didn't take up a lot of space. Frequently, they'd be towards the front of the shop or adjacent to magazines. Now, here's how I played the spinner rack. As soon as I became a collector, I found out every place that displayed new comic books, and I made a deal with those shops and said, in return for the first crack at the comics, when they come in, I want to be the person to rack them for you.
Oh, wow.
And I did it on a route, like a paperboy route. And I racked 3 or 4 spinner racks every week at the same time. And I'm trying to remember what New Comic Book Day was back then. It wasn't Wednesday. It
was Friday back then.
I definitely don't remember. What I do remember is I'd be the guy, and everyone who ran these shops had zero interest in this stuff, so that I would do this would just take that burden off them. And one time a comic book came out I think it's 75, maybe. It was Nova #1. I found this comic cover to be so striking. And I think his name is Richard Rider. Is that right? I found that the character was so compelling because he was a teenager like myself, that I had my first kind of business move in comics. And it was this. I loved that book so much, and I thought it was so compelling, that I got like a fire under me. And I went all around town and I bought every copy of Nova #1. Every copy. So then I went around to all my friends who collected comics, and I said, man, I got this. I got a note. I love how that you guys had that like available. What a great cover. Unbeatable. And so I went back to all my friends who were comic collectors, and I sold that book to them for $1. So that was like my first time. This is also pre-testosterone, which is a different story. So like, I was like an evil comic book genius until testosterone. And then testosterone comes around, girls, and I was like, I'll sell it all. I need some fancy boots. I'm selling my comics. I got to make these women see me.
So were you sporting a bike, or were you skating at the time to these stores?
The best way to go is with my old chopper bike. I mean, impractical to skate, although I was a skater, for all the bumps and cracks. I could get around faster on my chopper bike. Bicycle.
There you go. Huffy Pro Sports bike. That's how I started off getting my collection. So I started off a little bit different than most people. I started January 25th, 1982 was when I first got my first book. This is the actual book, Avengers 129, January 25th, 1982 at the Friendly Neighborhood Comic Book Store. And they literally hired me because I was there every day in the dime boxes. And I would ride to school. My parents would give me $1, and I would run into Safeway and buy 4 packs of Bubblicious. I would go on the school platform and sell them for 50 cents each, and pimp out that Bubblicious, right? And have $1 for lunch and then $1 for my 10 comics. And I would go every day. And so one day they said, let us talk to your dad. We kind of want you to work here. You're a young kid, you're 12-year-old, come work. So I started working, and after 2 weeks, they said, this is what we need you to do after school, which was across the street, run over. And as I'm running over, I see this line, and there's about 300 people in this line. And they say, Jesse, stand right here. Do not let anybody cut in line. And here comes this old guy, and this old guy comes up to me, and he says, are you Jesse?
Whoa.
And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, you're watching the line. Make sure no one cheats. No one cuts in line. So I'm like, yeah, okay. Who's going to cut in line for this guy, right? And I'm watching people crying, and they're shaking and all that. And so what's funny is at the time I was only collecting Avengers. That's all I knew was Avengers. And that day I bought this book, Avengers 172. But like Brian, I was technically a Captain America fan. But because I had bought this, we were having dinner, and he said to me, who's your favorite character? And I said, well, Avengers. And he goes, well, that's a team. But who's your favorite character? And because I had bought that cover, I said Hawkeye. But as I'm saying Hawkeye, I'm like, I'm not a Hawkeye fan. And to this day, I cannot switch because I promised him I was a Hawkeye fan. So everybody has this moment in time, and it really takes time to, you get to 50 years, and you probably start thinking about this 15, 20 years into 30, 40, 50. And then it just dawns on you, you're the holder of this great tradition and culture of comic books that brings young kids together. And in the day and age, I can promise when Brian was going to these events, that probably the average age was 15 to 25-year-old. 25 was old, right? That was the old guy in the room.
Yeah. That's right.
And so that's what comics has brought, this culture that just follows you. The spinner rack and picking up the $10 off the rack and looking at the spines to get the best one, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like, I don't know which is better. If it's back in those old days versus now today. And the one thing I would add, I would say to Brian is, the difference back then is what was on the cover was in the interior.
Yeah.
Speak about that a little bit.
Well, also, I mean, the other thing that was neat about those days was, this is pre-internet and pre-obsession with people wanting information. When I showed up at the spinner rack, I didn't know what I would see. There was no diamond catalog. So it was all a delight. You'd kind of hope, wow, is there another Captain America? Wow, what is this thing called Sandman by Jack Kirby? Those kind of those discoveries were happening right then and there.
Yeah.
But
well,
go ahead,
hold on real quick. You said the magic word. You said diamond. So we got to introduce our fellow host, Mr. Dennis Barger.
Yeah.
What up, yo?
What's up, guys? How's my audio?
You're good, brother.
Sounds
You're
pretty
good,
good.
brother.
All right.
You're good, brother. So
I'm on the road right now, so I apologize. I'm in a hotel in Central Illinois.
Right on. Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah, definitely. So real quick, I think, and I'm hoping somebody will know more accurate, because I was a newsstand boy as well, and the box full of new newsstands was always on the floor when I went to school on Monday mornings. So I think they might have either gotten delivered with the Sunday newspapers or they were delivered on Monday morning, because they would usually be racked by the time I came home from school on Monday evenings. And I think they would get boxed up on Sundays because there was always the old box and the news box.
Yeah.
Right.
And the new box would go out, and then the old box was the stuff they pulled to send back.
Right.
Yes.
Which was very interesting, because Brian, you're talking about the cutoff pages, which are the return books where they just cut off the top and send it. How were you getting those books?
So that was, I was getting the new comics off the spinner racks, but on the weekends, our family went to this place called Collingswood Auction or Englishtown Auction. And both of those places had these remaindered magazine book stands. It was cool. They would have, all the books had slight imperfections. So it might be those returns where they're either completely coverless or they cut them for the logo. But they also had these interesting printing errors where if you were to look at the comic from the top, for example, you would start seeing these interesting discolorations. Yep. And that's the kind of stuff they sold. They sold it cheap. And that's where we would get those. There was this other divine place called Englishtown Auction. Again, it would sell everything from socks to plants, but there was a bookseller. And in the front, he had a selection of comics, but he had a back stock. Now, we're going way back, okay? So this is mid-'70s. It was kind of unknown. It only had three prices, 35 cents, 50 cents, or 65 cents. And you could either put your want list down and they would go get it. This place was gorgeous. Or they get to know you and you could go in. And guys, I bought comics like Fantastic Four number 34 for 65 cents. Wow. It was one of those crazy warehouses where they had overstock.
Right, sure.
They racked the books vertically in shelving units.
But again, you know what? A lot of the old timers, guys that are like 10 years older than all of us and older, they love that vertical filing system for those.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, how about you guys? I kind of was always I had a file drawer. I had a file cabinet. And I always thought, looking at them that way. And then, of course, when I finally discovered they had a long box. Yeah, I was like, oh, well, that's the way to do it.
My early collecting, I would find these files where maybe each shelving unit would be about that tall. So I would just vertically stack. I kind of like that. And that was probably before they started making half boxes. Mainly, back in the day, it would be like the long boxes, and then I started popping them in there as well. But for the longest time, guys, one other thing is, let's say I'm 15, 16 years old. I'm really proud to get like a Spider-Man or Captain America or Hulk shirt. I wear it down, hang out with all the kids. And man, it was not cool back then. So
you're right.
My comic collecting actually always continued. It never stopped, but it did kind of go into hiding. So I would always find places to hide my collection. I simply stopped talking about it by the time I was in 7th grade, although I continued to collect.
Yeah,
that's crazy. What's funny about this is I think the generation that we're talking about. When did you get your first Overstreet or the sense of what an Overstreet was?
So check this out. Early on, my territory was New Jersey, New York, Long Island. And there were a couple of known comic shops to visit. And one was called the Passaic Book Center. So that was about 50 miles north of where I lived. So that probably puts it in the overstreets that were coming out in 75 and 76. At that time, for my birthday, my mom brought me to Passaic Book Center, and she purchased for me Daredevil #1 and X-Men #1. It literally came out of a safe. This place was, Passaic Book Center had everything you ever wanted, but you'd never know the order because the owner more or less was a hoarder. So I did get those books, but the bad news is, soon as I turned 15, 16 and the testosterone started running through me, man, I sold those books so I had money to take chicks out on dates. And it's sad but true. But yeah, I held those books. I possessed those books for 5 or 6 years. And my recollection, of course, the way that memory paints things, both of those covers have a really dominant white background. So in my mind to this day, it's like, man, mine's had to be 9 6s. Who knows? But they were pretty clean.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. That is awesome. So when you sold those, did you had a essence of value, or you?
So yet in another turn, I went to work for a comic shop in 76. So that was simply back issues. It was owned by a man named Jim Walsh on the East Coast, who had J&S Comics. And so I would be his assistant, and I'd either provide my work for trade, or I was starting to get a sense of value. And I would actually go up and be Jim's assistant, going to places like the equivalent of New York Comic Con back then, which was in a place, it's called the Phil Suling Comic Art Festival. And it was taking place in the Penta Hotel. You know, everybody would lay out their wares, and I assisted for a couple years. So yeah, I was starting to understand that element. Now, let me be real honest with you. I have never been driven by the investment element of collecting. I just collect what I like. I have nice stuff, I promise you, but still, I'm aware of it, and I was looking at the overstreets, and I observed and was part of, all kinds of transactions. I'd still be the kid who gravitate towards like Astonishing Tales number 25. Who's this guy Deathlock? What's this Killraven guy? What Warlock, Jim Starlin? That's kind of where I'm coming from with comics.
Yeah.
There's other people that we know, right? Like people like Vincent from Metropolis. Always very smartly, we're kind of looking at it from a whole nother angle. Or people who collect original art, they were looking at it from that angle. For me, the magic has always kind of been in, the discovery and the reading and the cool places that comics can take your imagination.
Well, you talked about being on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey area. So why don't we bring on two other New York guys, ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy Palmiotti and Billy Tucci. Welcome, gentlemen.
How you doing, guys?
These guys.
What's up, fellas?
Excellent having you guys here. Thank you so much. Real quickly, since we already started, I got to ask each guest. We got to hear about your first comic books.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because Brian and I have a lot of similarities with things like Killraven and all like because we're around the same age, and you grew up. I'm in New York, he's in New Jersey, and not much different. We actually had one comic shop in Brooklyn that was called My Friend's Bookstore, and Paul Levitz used to work there as a kid.
Wow.
He used to be the guy. He used to be the guy that would go up on the ladder to get the expensive books in boxes.
Yeah.
But they used to have the 10 for $1 books, and actually that's where I got to like read a lot of the Jonah Hexes, and anything that wasn't Spider-Man or Superman or Batman went in the 10 for $1 boxes, and that's where I got my Killravens, and I got my Strange Adventures, and I got my Swamp Things, and so I grew up with all that, all that stuff. And then I think the thing that like hit me like a bolt of lightning was Heavy Metal magazine.
Oh, yeah.
It was because it was something that I remember I bought the first issue, and I was like, okay, what the hell is this? And there's sex, there's violence, the artwork looks like nothing. Who is this Mobius guy? And like it just like changed everything for me. And I remember the first trip I took.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah, there it is. I have it in a frame upstairs actually, but the first trip I took overseas many years later, all I did is go into French bookstores and buy collections. Not a word of English in these books, but I went and bought it by artists. I went to the Jordi Burnett's, the Manaras, the Mobius, the Bial, and like it kind of Corbin, all these guys. It kind of blew my mind, and it steered me away from superheroes. I got to say for a little bit, because I loved Superman when I was a little kid. Superman was. I read so many Superman, and again, I have older brothers, so there were comics all over the place. It was that and Little Annie Fanny in the back of Playboy. I was like a big fan of that. But it's my uncle had a barbershop, and in the barbershop he had stacks of comics, and I used to go in there and I used to give him one new comic for 4 old ones. That was my exchange. And when that started working, I started going up and down Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn and going, hey, I'll give you one new book. Let me pick out 4 old ones. And every barbershop's like, oh my God, yeah, we've had these comics for years. We need some new ones in the store. And that and the Salvation Army, because they used to charge by the pound, but you couldn't pick through the comics. So the guy would have a box, like it would be like $3 or $4. It'd be like maybe like 150 books in it, and you wouldn't be able to flip through it. But he used to wrap them in a rope, and I said, I'll buy all the comics you get. Just got to take the rope off and put them in a nice box because I want them in decent condition. So I used to get boxes and boxes of books that were, it was everything for a lot of Archies, right? Back then, the Archies were but I used to get so much variety and so many different things. And I think that's when I got older. I had like some great years at Marvel and DC, but it was never doing X-Men or Superman and Batman. It's always doing all the crazy characters. And I think my background in comics is that I was more interested in doing the weird characters and less interested in the mainstream ones.
But,
and that might
Jimmy, let me ask you, how old were you when you grabbed that first heavy metal?
So
Brian's trying to blame testosterone for getting rid of his comics.
Well,
and I've got another narrative that testosterone might have fueled young Jimmy Palmiotti's love of heavy metal.
Look, I had a beautiful copy of FF #1.
Wow.
I mean, we're talking about probably a 9.5 back, what it would be now. And I sold it for, I think it was like 400 and change, right?
Wow.
Back then. I bought a used car, which was my hotel on wheels when I was able to drive 16, and that was it, man. And comics were like second. All right, there's girls now. I had like the fever that lasted still.
That ended
but
never.
It was tough for me to give up that comic, but the fun that one comic brought me. I like to thank Stan. I actually did I thanked Stan to his face about it. I said, I got laid like a monkey because of your comment. And I told Stan that, and he's like, I think he said something, it's so good to hear these stories, like he was just going. But yeah, when the girls came in the scene, it's like the comics did. Same thing with Brian, man. It's like music. All of a sudden, it's like music and girls, and I never stopped buying them. I just stopped buying them in the massive quantity that I was consuming them. I never completely stopped because I got my heavy metal subscription. Remember when you can subscribe to things, and I got that. And again, I would like to go into the comic store and find the weird shit. Actually, I hit a lot of head shops too because I was always looking for Corbin comics and Robert Crumb stuff, But it definitely when you grow up and how it definitely influences a lot of what you read, and still to this day, I like the stuff that's more adult. I always have. I felt like the superhero stuff is great. Like I love all the people doing Batman and all that. But I have no desire. I've read all those stories a million times. I'm always looking for something new.
Yeah.
But anyway,
what about you, Billy?
To you, Billy.
Well, I was a similar story to you guys. I don't know, Jesse, how you kept doing. Well, I guess you made it like a little business for yourself. But I still have the first comic I ever bought, and I was at a flea market on Long Island where I grew up. And again, similar path to what you guys. And I was a monster kid growing up. So I played hockey. I played hockey a lot since I'm like 7 years old. And I had mini bikes and dirt bikes, and that was my passion. But I was an artist. I liked drawing and stuff like that. So I remember going to a flea market, and the first comic I ever saw and I bought, and there's two reasons for this too, why I bought it, was this one right here.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Love
And
that
I
Ghost
still
Rider
have it.
image.
It's really beat up. This has stayed with me all through. It was 1978, so I was in 6th grade. It stayed with me since 1978, which is what? Is that 46 years ago?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
I loved it. I was a big Beatles fan, so I love the Beatles. Even when I was in 5th grade, 4th grade, they were my band. So I love the Beatles, and I love Paul McCartney because it was 78, Wings Over America, it's 76. So I love it because I had the Band on the Run cover homage.
Oh,
if
neat.
you looked at it. And then when I saw what's in it is Werewolf by Night, so he immediately became my favorite character. And I love this book. And I'll never forget the one panel with the orb with Ghost Rider is racing with the character, the orb. He was a
That
racer.
eyeball guy.
Yeah, and yes, and then he's like the eye, and then but the weird thing is he says, and I slid 75 yards on my face, and this is the result, right?
Oh, wow.
There you
Right?
go.
I remember what a great panel, right?
Yeah.
But Jimmy, and this is something that we've talked about, right? It's on the odd numbered page. It's on the why was it on the even numbered page? So you flipped it and then saw.
Yeah.
Right, that review. And I remember thinking as a kid, like, wow, I would have put it, too bad you didn't, because I'm already looking at it when I'm reading this side of the page,
You
Right.
might be wrong.
All they
on that.
worried about was double page pagination. They weren't
But then
worried.
again, it also might have been just because of the reprint.
It
Yeah.
might have been a different way with the ads circulated in it, and that
Yeah.
might have been.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis is right, and also it's a reprint. That's a reprint
Yeah.
book. So
Yeah.
in the original comic, it might have been a page. You turn the
Right,
page.
right. But just
Yeah,
this
you know.
art is, oh my God. I mean, it's Ross Andrew.
Yeah.
And I loved Ross
Awesome.
Andrew. And Don
He's great.
Perlman inking it says, well, Len wrote it.
yeah.
Len wrote it off of Jerry Conway's plot. This is the Werewolf by Night stuff. I mean, just this art. So here's the thing with me. And again, like Brian, and I didn't do it consciously, but thank God I did too. But so this was in 6th grade. When you're in elementary school, let's just think kindergarten, right? All the kids kind of start at the same. Okay, I was drawing. Sorry. All the kids kind of start similar, right? And then those for the more proclivity for drawing, they might start to raise. You get to be like 6th, 7th grade, you start getting better, right? In art school, you just kind of start distancing yourself. The thing was, then I started collecting, right? And then Joe Kubert was a hero of mine, and Frank Miller, because then with Frank Miller's stuff and Klaus's work. The thing is that I loved Joe Kubert. I loved Walter Simonson. I wasn't a big John Byrne fan. I don't know why. I love George Perez's work, but the better I got at art, and I started getting good, and people like, what are you gonna do for like by 9th grade? And I didn't do it. I did it subconsciously. I left because again, with chicks and everything like that, and playing hockey, that the farther I got away from comics. Does that make any sense? Like, because I could never do this. I could never draw that. I could never draw like Ross Andrew. I could never, and Mike Esposito ink something. I could never do that. So I then literally still loved him. My nickname was Batman Billy Tucci in high school. Because I did like comics and I would draw Batman and stuff like that, but I also would do like a wicked killer Adam West, and I'll do that when we're drinking Thursday night, Jimmy and Brian. No, but that was my nickname, was Batman Billy Tucci in high school, whatever they just called me Bat. I don't know why. But then I was in college, and it was 1988. So 10 years from when this came out was when I kind of like I said, I literally left comics. I went to college for illustration. And this kid brought in the Amazing Spider-Man number 300.
Oh,
With the
wow.
Todd cover.
Yeah.
And
I had a subscription to that when it came out.
Nice.
I couldn't afford a subscription. And I remember I was so
Folded
blown
in
away.
half in my mailbox.
Right.
Brian.
Was it flat?
No, it was
Folded in
flat,
half.
Oh.
but
It's
they would fold it in half to fit it in your mailbox.
And what was with the Howard the Duck article saying mailed flat? Remember, he's like this.
Yeah, you can do that all you want, but Cliff Clavin's going to fold it in half when he wants to.
Yeah.
So that book blew me away, and what I loved about it was that it was so different. It wasn't a Buscema, it wasn't a Simonson. This guy's art, who I had no idea what his name, had such a kinetic energy and passion to it. That even though like Frank Miller changed the world, that I love Frank's work and everything like that. But again, there was just something about it that was so crazy, right? Like, the perspectives were off and stuff like that. But you could just see he was having fun. And I went to Manhattan Comics on 23rd Street in New York City to buy it. He had just bought that book and brought it in, maybe bought it the weekend before and brought it into class to show us. By the next Wednesday, whatever, I think comics came out on Wednesdays then, right? 88 maybe.
I think so.
That book was fucking $10, man.
Yeah.
I couldn't afford $10, so I bought 301 with the same cover, pretty much.
That's a lot of people's stories. I bet.
And then and that's when I just got hooked again. But I love this book to this day. I can't believe I kept this. Of all the moves we did, and we had a storage bin, and we couldn't afford to keep it, so we lost the storage with all our family stuff. But I always had this with me, like this in a few of my Disney art books and stuff like that. So it's one of my great treasures. I wonder if they could slab a big book like this. But
They can.
Can they?
I think
I like going through it. I like reading it.
Yeah,
It's
don't slab it.
striking.
So
Those
Billy,
Treasury editions,
the-
it's like the drive-in screen of comics. They're massive. It's like cinema.
It's like an album cover, right?
Yeah,
why are comics made like this now?
I love the Treasury editions. It's funny because I was sharing a cab with Dennis Cowan a couple of years ago, and he was telling me he's going to relaunch Milestone. And my one piece of advice, I said, look, it's just going to come out, and nobody's going to care for a month. I said, make every Milestone book Treasury size, and you'll win. And he's like, but the retailers hate the size, blah, blah, blah. I said, it doesn't matter. Anybody going to a comic store is going to see a giant Milestone comic. It's going to be like a little magnet. They have to go over there. I wish he listened to me, but he didn't.
Well, if we all listened to you, Jimmy, our lives would be
There
left.
you go.
So.
If I'm so smart, how come, whatever. I like to. I'm just like trying to say it's like in a sea of comics that come out every week. You have to do something a little bit different to get noticed,
So Billy, I was going to ask you. So were you specifically looking for creators in your comic books at a young age? Were you opening up and seeing?
No, I can't. No. I and I'm going to get to another point. I know I just gravitated because I remember seeing Mike Zeck's art then after I discovered Todd, and and then but then once I discovered Todd, and then I remember my first X-Men comic I bought was X-Men 268 with Jim Lee drew with Captain America, Wolverine, and Black Widow on the cover. And I remember seeing Jim's work. I'm like, wow, this is fucking great.
Yeah, that was mind-boggling.
Yeah, I just love that. And Will Spartaccio and, of course, Mark Silvestri. But going back to that, once I started discovering comics, and this is before that, this is, say, now 88, 89. Yeah, 88. So now I get into comics again. I start buying stuff. And as Brian was talking about the Penta Hotel, the Phil Suling shows, right?
Yeah.
in the basement.
That I'm like, honey, to Debbie, and we're at FIT down the block off of 7th Avenue, and the Penta Hotel's on 7th Avenue at FIT. I'm like, there's a Comic-Con, there's a comic book show Saturday right up the block. You want to go? She's like, yeah, okay. So the guys who know Debbie, and just a picture of Debbie in 1988, which I'm sure I got a picture of her right here.
Yeah,
we go.
The ozone hole got a lot smaller after that picture.
Dude, I have a similar what she was wearing. We went to the motorcycle.
I got some good ones at Debbie. You want me to go get them?
Hang on. Anyway, so
I don't know who was cuter, Debbie or Billy.
Yeah.
It was a tough decision.
So we go to the show, and I don't know if you guys. It was 88. I think it was spring of 88. and she's the only girl there.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, Debbie had to wear, I bet you she probably wore the tightest unwashed jeans, right? A tank top with a little jacket and heels, because she always wore. And I remember she just kept getting banged into and guys rubbing against her. And she's like, I have to get the fuck out of here now. And I'm like, what? What? And she just starts walking. And if you guys know my wife, she just starts going. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and I'm following out of the dealer's room, whatever, to the elevator. And I'm just like, I'm going to go. This is your thing. You have fun and just enjoy it. You go. I'm like, are you breaking up with me?
I kind of imagine Marissa Tomei and My Cousin Vinny.
Yeah, her hair was bigger than that. But she was chewing the gum, and then she's like, no, I'll see you later. I just can't be around these people. I got to go.
I remember that show. Some of the first ones I did are the Phil Soulings. I remember there was a guy, Rick Bryant, that was at every one of them, that he sat in the corner and was drawing. And it was Dave Cockrum one time when I went, and then it was George Perez one time when he just, I think he was doing Logan's Run or something like,
Yeah, wow.
But I remember these guys were like, you want a drawing? It's $5. I'll do a nice big piece for you. And it was like, I just remember that
$5.
Well, I remember at that one of those shows, right at the top of the escalator was a smaller room, and they gave that entire room to Jim Steranko.
Yeah.
And Steranko, even then, I'm a little kid. He talked to me like I was the only human being on earth.
That's phenomenal.
And he had no time limit. Like he just talked it up, and he was displaying his, if you remember, his super heroine girl calendar. Yeah. And I knew who he was. I loved his work. I had his caps. I brought them. And back in the day, people would sign their comics on the inside. And to this day, I have those. Yeah. I mean, meeting Steranko, that guy was such a charmer even then.
Oh, yeah. The biggest crime of the century is Jim didn't do 400 books after.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys.
It's like he blew his load on his bunch of books. Then he did Outland, which was great, and a couple little things.
Yeah.
And then
did you guys ever hear the story of why he stopped when he stopped?
No.
I've heard many stories. I think some of them he told me.
The one that he told me that I loved the best was, I remember the last time I was doing it, and Stan came out and said, draw it like Jim. And it was the first time he had heard him say, draw it like Jim instead of draw it like Jack.
Jack, yeah.
And he said apparently it really hit him in the gut to the point where he was like, well, I've made my impact. I can move on.
Wow.
I personally think that he realized that there's no money in the business.
Yeah.
and he started doing the Media Scene magazine and started getting into selling books. And it was a hell of a lot more lucrative than him spending a week or two on some pages or a cover. Because back then, you got to remember, the page rates were like $100. He got $100 for a cover. And when he was doing Media Scene, he was selling out of his house in Pennsylvania. He was selling tons of books. He was like the middleman, like for an Amazon type thing. And that Media Scene magazine, I know it's like comic people got it and they ordered stuff from Jim all the time because he had stuff that nobody else had. I think he saw that as a much better income for himself. A lot of the guys you talk to in the 70s, I mean, even Barry Smith and all those guys, they all like got to a point where like it's not worth the money they're paying. You look at a Barry Smith page and you realize he didn't do that in an afternoon.
Right.
And then you realize, what is he getting? $150 for a page and he worked on it for a week?
I was looking at a period of time because I was kind of stalking Craig Russell. Yeah. And I'm like, what did he do? I love this. I love this. I love this. What? It's like one pinup in this, one splash page over here to finish up. And I'm just like, how did you not keep this guy working?
Yeah. Well, another thing though, a thing that happened though too, that a lot of like say Steranko types that moved over into the 90s, I think, because there was no in the 90s working for Marvel and the 2000s and today, you really can't be like a John Buscema and do or Kirby doing 2 pages a day and push it off to an inker. right? A lot of those guys are gone. There's no Tom Palmers anymore. And what I think that's all attests to the image art, to the image guys, that they did so much and that's it inspired me a lot. They did so much rendering, so much full pencils, almost not giving, and Jimmy, you'll attest to this as an inker, not giving them anything to work with, in a way. Right. And I think a big part of it too was a lot of artists want, and I'm guilty of it. You wanted to press your editors too when you were doing stuff for the mains, Jimmy, instead of the X, I'm filling that sucker in with pencil with the blacks to show the shading and all that stuff. And
yeah, I think also like Jim in Steranko's case, he started doing stuff for movie studios, and the pay is like, look, I came from an advertising background. When I was in advertising, I made at least 4 or 5 times more money than I did in comics, but it wasn't the thing I loved to do. And I took a big pay cut when I turned 30 to get into comics. But Jim was doing, the adaptation for Outland was a commercial job. It was not a comic book company. It was done for the studio. We're talking about, I used to draw a can of ham, and it would be like 5 times more than I got paid for a whole book. So it was so. Once you're in that
part of the, can I ask you though? Because I just talked to a commercial artist, and he said something that kind of hit me, and I'm wondering if this is also subconsciously for somebody like yourself, Jimmy.
Yeah.
He never got to sign anything he did commercially. No one ever knew it was him that did it. Is that something that psychologically?
Well, I think there's a lot of comic artists out there that people still don't know what they are. Yeah. But I will say that in advertising, when you work in a studio, you're not supposed to take credit. I used to hide upside down pyramids in the movie posters I did. Pale Rider has one on the horse. City Heat has one in the background. I used to do that, but honestly, when you work in advertising, I work for Pepsi, I work for Maybelline, I work for Malpaso. I never put my name on stuff, and it wasn't about that though, right? Where comics are different because you're it's you put your name on something, it's sort of like you're responsible for it at the same time. So if you're gonna do a crappy job and you got your name on it, you're not gonna do a crappy job. Now, if you're working in advertising and you just gotta knock something out, the last thing you want to do is throw your name on it. Yeah. Right. You know that can of beans over there, or that Centrum label for that vitamins? I did that. There wasn't really any bragging rights with that kind of stuff.
Well, that's why you guys got into comics.
It's better. I mean, it's tough when you work for a company like Maybelline compared to Marvel Comics, which there was no comparison. Every woman in the world was wearing Maybelline. How many people were buying comics?
Jesse, what do you got? What do you got there, real quick, and then I'm going to bring in Mike.
So I bought this in 1984.
That's the best.
Yeah, and it's the full calendar of Jim Steranko. It's signed by him. Just amazing. Great stuff. And at a young age, we have good eyes, right? We just see something and we really like it. The one thing I want to ask the three of you: what years were you three going to that basement con? Do you remember?
It started in 96. Jimmy was the first one. It was like February or January of 1996. Because
not the Suling. You're not talking about the Suling. You're talking about
Greenberg. Greenberg was supposed to put on the New York Comic Con, and something happened, lost his money, and then they put on the first Church Con, because I remember it. It was right after the Atomic Angels party. And it was like February of 96.
Okay. See, mine was in the 70s. It was like mid 70s.
Yeah.
I remember because they had Fantastic Four.
Is that the one that later became the Habanero show?
Yes, Carbo's the one to put it on. I'm sorry, Jimmy. I'm sorry if I misconstrued. Yeah. I'm talking about the Church Con that we hung out at. I'm not talking about the one when we were little kids. That was.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if the three of you young kids were at that con. No. Okay.
No, I only went to one con, and my girlfriend left me at that con.
Brian and I might have been in the same room at some point.
Yeah, I think we're only like 3 months apart in age, so we probably were. Who knows?
Yeah, my dad used to come with me, and when I would buy a comic, he would tell the guy, "You're not going to charge a kid that much for that." My father would harass the guys. I remember Conan 1 was $10, and my dad's like, "You know how many houses he had to shovel snow to pay for this book? Give it to him for $6.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was
awesome.
That's a
So
good
if I
dad.
could talk about Comic Cons real quick, because I know we want to bring Mike in and stuff. But I talk about when Brian had said something that how Jim Steranko had that room, and Brian, this kid, sat or was talking to Jim Steranko, and Jim Steranko talked to him like he was the only one in that room.
Undivided.
This week, next week is my 30th San Diego Comic Con. It's actually my 31st San Diego Comic Con. It was 1994. We were there at Comic Con set up. Debbie and I with our little Crusade booth right around the corner from Brian, right around the corner from Jeff Smith. But in 1993, I went to Comic Con wanting to be a Marvel or DC Comics artist. I hit every publisher, every editor, every great and small publishers from Marvel to down to Image to DC Comics to Harris Comics to fucking Dark Horse, everybody. And finally, I made my way to small press, as you do, and showing everyone my stuff. And there was this one awesome guy, young guy, sitting at a 6-foot table in small press, and I think he had Jason Jensen next to him, and I think Mr. Hughes was you too, right? Was he there?
He might have been, yeah.
I think he was there. Anyway, I showed Brian my pages, and Brian talked to me like a peer, and encouraged me and was telling me about his book, Evil Ernie, that now he is going to be publishing this next year with his new comic book company. I met the two guys with him. It was Stephen Hughes. I'm almost 100% positive it was Stephen. All three of you guys were great to me. We sat there. We had a great conversation, and you offered me a pinup in a book coming out next summer or whatever it was.
Did you get it into him yet? Did you get it into him?
Dude, it was, yeah, man, I got it in. I might have. I think I might have been one of the first ones.
I'm just checking. Brian's people like to ask. I got to ask.
No, I think I got it. No, but I didn't know it was a swimsuit issue, so I put her like a mermaid costume, and it worked. Anywho, but that was Brian Pulido. And I came home, I was on my plane, and I wrote about it in my 30th book. I was on the flight, lonely flight home, because I used all my savings to fly out there thinking I'll get something.
Right.
Crestfallen. And then everyone had rejected me. And I remember thinking, and I'm like, everyone except for that fucking dude from New Jersey, that lived in California now, that's doing his own comic. And I remember thinking, I'm like, why can't I do my own comic?
Right.
Why should I be sitting there with these guys that cannot draw, these editors, and they're asking me, and I got offered a job if I could draw like Jim Lee. It was for DC. They wanted to do an annual, and they said, can you draw like Jim Lee? First of all, I'm no Jim Lee, right? But I don't want to be Jim Lee. There's no way I'm sure I could trace his work or look at his work and try to ape him, but why would I want to do? That's not me.
Right.
And I remember coming home and talking to my girlfriend, now my long-suffering wife, and I'm like, I'm going to make my own comic book. And that was August, I think, of 1993. No idea what I was doing. I had no idea about anything. I had no idea how comic shops got their comics. I had no idea. I had no idea about color separations. I had no idea about color codes when you do. Because now I'm
actually, it's a good thing, because in '94 everything got flipped upside down on how comic stores got comic books. So you're
well. This is 93. So I'm like, I'm going to make my own comic book. By hell or high water, there's no plan for me. There's no plan B for me. I don't know if it'll be successful, but there's nothing stopping me from putting out my own comic, and it's going to be full color. I didn't know what the fuck.
I get it, man.
Son of a bitch.
My story too. Just I had no clue, but I was going to do it.
Yeah, and my that was August of '93, and in March of 1994, She-Way the Warrior #1 debuted. And thanks for this man right here. And on our panel next week, we have a panel about crowdfunding comics.
Right.
And then we have a panel with Overstreet. Well, we have 3 panels. Well, Jimmy and I and Brian we have 2 panels we're on together too. The Overstreet Price Guide 30th anniversary She and Lady Death panel, and then the comic book couples panel, where you want to see some fireworks. Have our women talk about us.
Yeah, there you go.
But then again, there's Amanda. So Jimmy's trying to rope Amanda in. She's crazier than all of us. Anywho, so but I would not be here for either of you two guys, my two friends in the center. And the same thing to a testament to you, Jesse, and you, Dennis, too, because if you guys didn't buy our books, Brian, you inspired me. And in heights that and then you took me, and both you guys took me, and I like to joke to you guys that I'm the kid brother you guys never wanted.
You're only saying that because it's absolutely true.
Yeah, and but just that. Thank God for like Brian, Lady Death #1 coming out on February 17th, 1994, I believe.
February 9th, but yeah.
February 9th, and this is the coffin coin I'm bringing.
Hell
So
yeah! I got mine.
I'm bringing this year. I got a bunch of them. I'm bringing this one. But because of the success of Brian Pulido, that Lady Death sold out so quickly, and he had put out such a phenomenal comic that people looking for the next thing, and I guess my book was the next one in line that popped up, changed my life. Jimmy and I became friends the day we met, sitting next to each other at that New York show, whatever. He had no idea who I was, and we just hit it off. And you guys have just been wonderful brothers and guiding lights to me, and inspiration. And I'm just so happy to be here. And I cannot believe that after, I bought this 40 years ago, right? I know this is, Brian, your 50 years of collecting. This is my 40 years of collecting. What did I say? 46 years. Okay.
46,
so a few years behind. That now I'm here, that I was able to raise as a one income home provider to provide for my family. Well, one income, it's me and Debbie, two of us, that through comics that you guys were able to that you guys were able to give us an amazing life, and to raise our two children. And it's all because of comics, and it's all because you guys out there watching. It's for people like you, Brian. It's for my two brothers over there on the right, my two brothers in the center, and me. And it's a dream come true, right? It really is a.
Can I ask you a question, Billy, before you leave? Because I think are you wrapping up?
No, I got Mike in the back in the green.
No, but here's the thing. I've known Billy for 25 years. I've known Jimmy, I think 25, 20 years off and on. Brian, 25, maybe the full 30 off and on. I've seen the three of you interact for at least 20 years. And easy. Billy, just with your military background, you guys are your own little band of brothers because you guys came up at the exact same time. You built yourself together, and and even when you would go off in separate ways, there was always these crossover projects. I mean, I'm just thinking of Jimmy bringing Billy on for a variant of Jonah Hex in the middle of the run that was one of the best variants.
Well, I drew that whole issue.
You drew the whole book, yeah.
There you go. But the point is
all right.
Just the relationship you guys have kept and maintained for those 30 years is almost as important as the work you've done.
Before you bring in the next guest, just real fast, and Brian, I already know what you're going to say, but when you're speaking, can you tell us about the first time the three of you were together?
Oh God, it had to be alcohol and involved, and
well,
remember I used to have my birthdays out there.
Yeah,
when the show was in August. That's the first time we drank.
Well, Brian almost got thrown out of the first San Diego I was at with him, and when they beat up some dudes that stole Stephen Hughes' office.
That's true.
Well, we got to hear about that.
Time we solved problems differently.
Yeah.
My recollection of meeting Jimmy, there used to be a thing called the Sequoia Athletic Club in Southern California, and they brought Jimmy, Joe, and Tex in. And I just think what we met, and we're just instantaneously thick as thieves. Yeah. And I definitely want to chime in a little bit. We're getting like a little kumbaya, but it's true. Yeah. Like, you got to know, for these guys here, we are a band of brothers, and whether the world knows it or not, we've been on each other's speed dial through the thick and the thin.
Yeah.
And, I think I speak for Billy too. We hold Jimmy in a whole nother place. We're pretty good at what we do, but Jimmy's the godfather. He sees things in ways that other people don't. Jimmy also inspired me to get into crowdfunding. And I mean, we could kind of go on this particular tack. I mean, besides being friends, for both these guys, I have just nothing but respect for their journey, the fact that they're willing to work, that they think differently, that they're willing to solve problems. That's all the things that I admire. And I think we've all, even besides working together, we probably spend much more time socializing. Like the world doesn't even know that. Like how many times like we've closed the bar down, bought pizzas for everybody. I mean, that's part of our commonality. Like we're always partying together.
Yeah.
And
we also had but we got in, and it's funny because when Brian got in, then I followed him, then Jimmy was doing mainstream stuff too. Before that,
he was arrived, man.
Superstar. But when we started doing our publishing our own works, you had this influx and this revolution of independent comics. And amongst them were, Brian and then Crusade Comics. But before
Event.
Me, you had Event Comics with Jimmy and Joe, but they were superstars too, though.
Right.
Instantly, they were like image guys.
Instantly.
Yeah, but then you also had Terry Moore come in with Robin, right? You had with Strangers in Paradise, and then you had Jeff Smith and his wife Ajaya, and they came in, and we were all like wide-eyed, like what? What is happening? Like, and we didn't know what we were doing, but we all the same conversation we're having right now, except we're all drinking beers and stuff. But we just found this family, right, of just cool, easygoing, passionate people that love comics, love the craft, love the industry, and just want to make our mark and just do what we love. And hopefully people want to buy the books that we love.
Yep. And I want to thank both of you guys because I don't take compliments very well. I know you know that. I just kind of like blowing them off because I've never been taught to take a compliment. I don't know why it's some kind of thing, but I adore you, both of you guys. You know that, and I would do anything. You needed my help for anything. I'm there in 3 seconds. Obviously, I get a call, and but we grew up the same. We're trying to entertain other people. We're trying to create things that have a legacy. That are not just disposable, but that. And we're so worried about connecting with our audience. We spend a lot of time with our audience because it's the most important thing to us. We want to make sure we're making stuff that they like.
Yeah.
And part of that, the core of that is, of course, we have to create stuff we like, right? Yeah. And that's where the core of it is. And that's where we connected. We also have very stupid senses of humor, and when we're sitting around, it's just the conversation is just. I always said that the missed thing is somebody just recording our dinners, and just having, because it would be the greatest thing to cut into like a 2-hour movie once we have like 15 dinners. It would definitely have to be put out after we're dead, because of all the shit talk. But I think that's the fun of our friendship is we feel safe with each other.
Yeah, but we're also honest with each other. Like, holy shit, I've had Jimmy and Brian. Like, what do you think of this? Like Jimmy's like, it doesn't suck, but or worse. That's like it.
Those are the best of friends.
He's like, and you trust each other, right? Brian's here, like, you know what? He's like, yeah, dude, I don't know.
We should just do a book together one day. Yeah. We should just do a book together one day.
I like that idea. Let's talk about it next week. Talk about that possibility of getting together on something like that next week.
Over dinner, we should.
Let's mull it over dinner.
Hey, remember that movie where all of the old retired mobsters were going to pull off a bank job?
Yes.
I think it's kind of like that.
Like with Jennifer Tilly in it? Was the one with Jennifer Tilly in it?
Yeah.
That's all I remember.
Speaking of doing a book together, there is a guy who is a big part of Brian's life and comic book life and career that is a newer part that you do a book together with currently. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike MacLean is joining us. Mike, thank you for joining us, man.
Hey, Mike. And I'm going to bounce, if it's okay. I have to do a piece for the Baltimore Comic Con. I got to finish. I'm doing the Tick and She for their charity book.
Awesome.
And I got to finish it or they're going to murder me. So
thank you, Billy.
Love you all. MacLean, I like to go to Scotsman right there with me. I like drinking the old Triz, low carbs. Well done. Yeah. Hopefully, I'll see you all. I'll definitely see you guys. Jesse, you coming next week?
Yep, I will be there.
All right. Love you guys. Thank you so much, Brian. 50 friggin' years of collecting comics and like straight on. You have every Captain America or almost?
I have the great majority. Well, I have definitely all the volumes of Captain America from Marvel since his resurrection, all of his key appearances up to about 1985, and that's when they started going kooky. But yeah, I'm all in, and I have a couple of Golden Age.
Exceptional. All right, guys, I want to go because I got to finish this work. My wife's going to Me. All right, love
Thanks,
you guys.
Billy.
Give Deb my best.
Love you,
Bryan
man. Peace
McClay,
out.
McClay, sorry, Brian. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for coming out.
Anytime.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll see you guys all next week, man.
Okay.
All right. Take
Later,
care.
brother. Thanks,
And
Billy.
I'm gonna sign out to Mike. It's not you. Don't take it personally. I'm gonna sign out. But this was great, Brian. Thanks for putting it together, both
Thank you.
Brian's. And Dennis, great to see you. Jesse, we'll see you next week, man.
Is that a
Yeah, I'll see
Bigfoot
you
hat,
next
by the
week
way,
in
Jimmy?
a couple weeks for lunch over in Florida. So
Is
Mike,
that a
I'll see you at
Bigfoot
the show,
hat?
right, Mike?
Yeah.
Mike's gonna be at the show.
Oh no, I'm
No?
a teacher, and that's when we're starting our year. So
All
unfortunately,
right.
By,
Well,
by the way, Jimmy, is that a Bigfoot hat?
yes, it is.
There we go.
I was gonna wear my company hat, and then I was like, "Well, Bigfoot's not polarizing."
No.
I'll see you
Thanks,
guys.
Jimmy.
Take care.
okay,
All right,
thanks.
Jimmy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent stuff. Mike, thanks for joining us tonight, man.
thanks for having me.
Brian, tell us a little bit of how you met Mike, and because Mike comes from a little bit different place in the creative world, right? I mean, you look at Mike's background, and it's not all comics based.
I'd actually let Mike tell the story because I think he's, Mike, why don't you tell the story?
Well, I want to give some advice to anybody that wants to create comics, and that is to stalk Brian Pulido. Stalk him, just follow him around. No, I come from a film background. I was lucky enough to get involved in writing screenplays for the late great Roger Corman. I got to write a few of those cheesy B movies that they showed on the Sci-Fi Channel, and it was a great deal of fun. I wrote a movie called Sharktopus and Piranhaconda and Attack of the 50-Foot Cheerleader, all cinematic masterpieces, one and all. But
Snubbed by the Oscars every time.
it's snubbed every time. But my first true love was always comics. I did notice, I think it was, Brian can help me out, 2013 maybe, 2012.
Sounds about right.
At Phoenix Comic-Con. Brian was appearing there. He was the producer on a short film created by Garth Ennis, Stitched, I think it was.
Yes.
I love Garth Ennis's work, but I was there to see Brian because Brian, I'd learned, also did films, and he did a film for the Sci-Fi Channel. And as much as I loved working with Roger Corman, I thought, Roger's in his late 80s at the time. Maybe a good idea to branch out, and maybe I could get into comic books too. So they had a film premiere, a short premiere for the short film, and I just went up there and introduced myself to his lovely wife, Francesca, and handed her my card. And Brian and I met a week later and talked, and we just kind of hit it off. So we did a couple screenplay projects together. That maybe someday we'll see the light of day. And then Brian asked if I, was interested in writing comics. And I said, what? No. Yeah, of course. So I said, yeah. So the first comic I published as a co-writer with Brian was Lady Death Damnation Games. And that was in 2015. So this would be my 9th year. If you count that, we were writing about a year before that, but my 9th year in comics.
Yeah, and since then, I guess we've written, God knows, dude, internally, because stuff that's not published, 46, 7 things at this point.
Right, which are all 48 pages. So that's like writing double that, right? So or more. So and it's been an amazing ride. Brian is an awesome co-conspirator and mentor, and he knows so much about comics. I look at the landscape in comics today, and I can't believe how lucky I was to get involved with Brian and Coffin Comics with, just the kind of the toxic stuff that goes on out there. And that's completely absent from Coffin. It's an awesome working environment. And I've just been, I feel so just grateful every time I get to write a script. So it's been awesome.
Yeah. And in my perspective, thanks, Mike. In my perspective on that too, is like, it was Kismet. You have those rare creative relationships. For example, like I was very lucky that Stephen Hughes and I met in that creative relationship, which lasted for 9 years. I mean, you become more than the individual parts. You become this kind of new thing. And there's a lot of metaphorically speaking, some, like singing together, playing things together. And that was wonderful. And, there was a great loss when Stephen passed, and different types of creative relationships. However, when Mike and I met and became co-writers, it was another one of those rare experiences where we actually philosophically have a lot in common in our approach to story. And I think I would say too that we have different strengths and they are very complementary. And for example, we just wrapped up Lady Death chapter 21. I did my pass. I worked, sometimes we have a thing internally where one guy, we tend to like come up with the basic story premise together. And then one guy or the other kind of gets a little more fired up about it, and we call it taking the lead. So I took lead on Lady Death 21, sort of fired up about it. And then I tossed it to Mike, and he had a couple of really interesting revelations about the story. And then I looked at that again. Maybe I'll be the polisher. And then I look in and I'm like, well, what if we do this one extra little bit? And then Mike liked it as well. And then we're, like off to the races.
Well,
so
Brian, just on your process, and you've had, obviously your process is going to change over 30 years for sure. But off of that process, was there ever a time where it was, look, the image in my head has to have a story to go with it? Or is there a point where I have this story, who's going to do the best art for me if it's not me? Tell us that process of the roller coaster of art before. When I say art, I'm not saying writing isn't art. Let me get that straight. But the art before the word.
So in the 90s, I used this process that I called clustering. So it's sort of like ingredients of soup. It's like I'm going to put in some carrots and some onions. And what I was doing is I was kind of pulling out what I would call attractors. Wouldn't it be cool to do this, that, and the other? And I might have a scene that I want to get to. And that is, I guess we're in a kind of a different version of the same thing where it's like, hey, wouldn't this be cool if we put Lady Death in an alternative future universe? I really like X-Men Days of Future Past. Let me do my take on it. So that literally might have been the kernel of something. So yes, I know that into next year's storyline, it's no secret that I'm telling people that next year's storyline on Lady Death, we get into sword and sorcery. So it's like just starting with that, I actually went back and read the first 27 issues of Conan, the Barry Windsor Smith, Roy Thomas run. Right. What I did is I actually cataloged everything that I thought was the essence of sword and sorcery. So it would be like, how do people behave? There's a lot of betrayal. What are the settings? They seem to do like these crazy things in third acts, like earthquakes. There's a lot of man beasts, giant spiders. So I was sort of taking notes and clustering all that stuff at first and saying, I'm going to get all this stuff in there somehow. And so, yeah, my process, maybe it might be a scene, an image, a moment. I'm really big on moments because I think comics are really defined by moments. Like the classic moment we might have all read is the Fastball special where Colossus picks up Wolverine and chucks him. It's like Claremont is amazing for moments and like reveals of energy and stuff. So I'll keep those things in mind. I know that I can't speak for Mike, but I think Mike is really awesome, not only on dialogue, but also like, plot driven stuff as well. So we sort of come together on both that stuff.
Can you guys talk a little bit about La Muerta? Because that's I'm a big fan of that character, and Mike, you also help work on that too. Talk a little bit about La Muerta and how you guys work on that.
Go for it, Mike.
Well, La Muerta is pretty much the same way. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll have a very a fun meeting where we'll sit down and we'll just talk about what we're interested in. We'll come have some vague plot ideas, and then one of us will take the reins doing an outline. And then usually with La Muerta, usually I take the reins on doing the script and I hand it back to Brian, and he says, yeah, this is cool, or nah, let's kind of go at this angle, or I want to include this. Brian also has these great pieces of advice, like, hey, we want to use blank in this. Like, for example, the next La Muerta is going to have, can I say this, Brian?
For 2025? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Midnight is going to be a guest star. And I hadn't thought of that idea, and it just worked so organically with the story. So we'll come up with these little ideas, and then usually I'll take the reins on the script and we'll just hand it back and forth, just like with Lady Death.
Mike tends to lead La Muerta. I'll tend to lead Lady Death. It's sort of split on Hell Witch. I took lead on the first Lady Satanist because I was just obsessed. And then it wound, from a timing perspective, Mike took the lead for sure on the next Lady Satanist, which takes place in the 80s during the hair metal era. So
Hell
yeah, it kind of
yeah.
just depends on, you know, who's more fired up. We have one coming out in September called Mike Morgue. And I just was super fired up, and I kind of rocked that thing pretty hard. You know, both chapters of that, the 2025 version too, because I just wanted to get back to like ultra violent male horror hero guy. And so, yeah, it's kind of, you know, I think here's the interesting thing. I don't know what you think about this, Mike, but like we just do it. And there's like, there's no like, you know, Mike got a little better on this one or that, or there's no competition. There's no jealousy. It's just like, we're playing around. It's like, yeah, this works great.
A phrase that we use a lot is love letter. This is a love letter to blank. And I think that's really informative, because it's like, we just love this stuff. Like La Muerte is a love letter to, you know, not only supernatural stuff, but definitely The Punisher and action movies. And so, you know, we just kind of, that kind of pushes us to create these stories.
You know, the thing is though, it's amazing nobody hit on that until Brian, published that, because it was such a big subculture. And then it was just like, wow, okay, you know, this is something different.
Yeah, you're talking about La Muerte, right?
Yeah.
I have to tell you, Brian made me nervous for La Muerte. We were actually writing La Muerte years before it came out. The comic book came out, like 3 years at least. Yeah. We wrote a screenplay first.
Yep.
And I was seeing that iconography appearing in everyday culture more and more and more. Yeah. Not just like when they do a news story on Dia de los Muertos, but like on handbags, on T-shirts. And I'm like, we got to get this thing out before somebody else does. And
right.
Luckily, Brian was smart enough to wait for the right artist. And he did, and which is Joel Gomez, who is the perfect interior artist for La Muerte. Can't think of anybody who could do it better. Which was very, that was very disciplined, I think, of Brian to wait for that artist, because, it was something in the zeitgeist was going on with that, and somebody was going to get it before us, and luckily we got it out.
What happened for me was in 2011, I think it was 2011, I had gone down to Tucson Comic-Con, which at the time happened in the first weekend in November. It coincided with an event, a community-based event down there called the All Souls Procession, which is an expression of Dia de los Muertos. And it's remarkable because it's people, as a community event, it attracts 200,000 to 300,000 people.
Yep.
And it's mind-boggling. And I experienced the event. And this is a way for the Mexican-American culture and others to contend with the fact that those we love pass. Everything from pets to moms, dads, victims of nuclear exposure, all kinds. And it just, I then began to immerse myself in this culture, knowing kind of intellectually, I was sort of running around and said, I want to do a revenge story, but I want to set it in somewhere different. And this culture like smacked me, I was gobsmacked by how rich it was. And that was sort of the beginning of the journey. And sometimes the story is fun if you let the story be a journey of discovery. So we discovered quite a lot. And I guess
you talked about earlier when we were first talking about what grabbed you when you first saw the comics, and how comics are such an art-based form, right? And that first thing that you see and how that grabs you. And when it comes to the Dia de los Muertos and the Southwestern culture, you see something like this and it just grabs you immediately. And it's just beautiful. And you wonder what it is. It's a little scary. It's everything that comic books are too, sometimes, especially coffin comics, right? Especially Brian Pulido comics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful.
You know what? I want to do a follow-up question here for you, Brian. You talked about you went back and read Conan 1 through 21. Can you describe to us as the kid Pulido reading Conan 1 through 21 versus being a critic to better your storyline?
It's interesting. So when I was younger, it was very natural for me to submit to a certain sort of storytelling because that was what was dominant. So what you're looking at is generally comics of that era are very text heavy. Frequently, they actually describe what you're already looking at. So the modern comic is actually more economical in the use of words. And one of the goals mainly is like what you see and what is said usually is a counterpoint. So to go back and read those Conans, I really, really, really had to submit to that old school style.
Sure.
I had to kind of luxuriate in the words and try to understand the message that Roy Thomas was trying to get across. What really was outstanding experientially rereading Conan 1 through 27 was the development and growth of Barry Windsor Smith. And as a consequence, the growth and development of Roy Thomas. Because there came a point, particularly as they're moving into issues like 20, 21, 22, and 3, Red Sea, I think it's called. Is that it? The introduction.
Red Sail.
Yeah. You started seeing Roy back off on the words, and you started seeing Barry Windsor Smith starting to take his time on the panel construction and letting it flourish. That's why, in fact, one of the things that we saw was that Barry Windsor Smith would go into these 8-panel grids, and we have a couple in our story too, where to really have things move along, it's like 2 tiers of equal distant 4s. That was another thing we picked up on, because when he was really hitting his stride, his storytelling was really, really inventive. So yeah, it was definitely a journey of discovery. I think at the time too, I was under the weather or something strange was happening. So I'm reading this while I'm kind of like having a fever. So it's like a psychedelic fever dream rereading it.
How much of that do you think was the Stan Lee Marvel way, meeting 2 guys who were coming into their own? So Stan at the beginning, I'm speculating here, but Stan at the beginning might have said, "Do it this way," and as Roy and Barry started hammering it out, and Stan's like, "Oh no, why don't you guys just do this yourself? I don't need to even be involved anymore."
It's a good question. I'd be speculating too. I'm going to drop a name. Roy Thomas is a guest at the convention that we are owners of, Tucson Comic-Con. So I might ask that of Roy, because as you guys probably know, throughout the 60s, there was a process called the Marvel Way, which was usually like a 2 to 3 page plot that allowed the artist a ton of latitude to interpret the story. Then it would come back to the writer, and then the writer would write over it. But there definitely was a lot of transition. So that era of the comic was what published 71, 2, 3. I think you just see it on the page. There's a loosening. You could see Windsor Smith kind of taking over a little bit and really kind of leaning in. But I think I might ask Roy about that.
I think that also happens in Spider-Man, right when Romita takes over, where Stan's like, "Okay, I've been trying to curtail this Ditko guy for so long, and now I got this Romita guy, and this guy's going to play ball with me, so I'm going to give him a lot more slack than I gave Steve."
Yeah, I could see that. I think what they recognized too, and this is tangential, but I think what they recognized in Romita naturalistically is that he drew men heroically. So Peter Parker went from being scrawny and gaggly to kind of like sort of well-built, and he drew women beautifully, Mary Jane, and it changed the game for Marvel. I mean, this is another topic that actually I'm quite passionate about, is that John Romita Sr. is probably single-handedly responsible as art director for the popularization of comic books as a whole, and Marvel Comics in particular.
Yeah.
So he changed the game. And Ditko's rad. There's no judgment there, but like Romita just made comics for everybody. And the men were good looking, the bad guys were ugly, and the women were gorgeous.
Before we bring in the young kid of the group, I want to talk about something, and you brought up Ramita, and you guys brought up Ditko and Spider-Man in particular. And there's something that when it happened, I thought was one of the coolest things that I'd ever seen in comic books. And Brian, you had a big part in that, and that was the Ultimate Spider-Man project, which was unfrickin' believable. Can you talk a little bit about this project and how it came up and that type of stuff?
Yes, so the Ultimate Spider-Man project was a project published by the Hero Initiative. The Hero Initiative is a comic book veteran charity that raises funds for veterans in need. It was originally founded by Mark Alessi, rest in peace, of CrossGen, but it is now run by Jim MacLean, ex of Wizard, and it's been in existence since about 2001. I've been very privileged and honored to be on the board, particularly in the fundraising area. And at one point, Jim MacLean called me up and he's like, Brian, dude, I need something. And so what he was saying is we needed something that we could fundraise on, something that could really kind of drive interest in Hero and drive funds in so that we could distribute them to vets in need. I think what he was realizing is that we were kind of coming off the cusp of in-person art auctions. They were very successful during the early MegaCon era, but it would only reach a small group of people. So I don't exactly know what came to my mind, but what I said was, what if we could publish a comic book with nothing on it, and then we have top artists of the day draw on it, and then we auction that off? And Dan Buckley of Marvel signed off on it, and that became the birth, I believe, of the sketch cover.
Yeah.
And for that particular 100 project, we even had a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man. I got to hold it in my hands. I think it auctioned off at that time for $12,500, which I guess in retrospect was probably a deal. But you could see the names that were involved. And I do believe that was the introduction of the comic book sketch cover, which ultimately is completely ubiquitous and all over the place now.
Yeah, this was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. I forgot to grab mine downstairs. It's sitting on my table downstairs. But if anybody is out there and listening to this and doesn't know about this, you can find this in hardcover. There's also the original that they released as it's almost like a comic book, and it has almost all the images inside. There was a couple I think that you got a little late, but it is everybody you can think of and then some did sketches on Ultimate Spider-Man sketch cover. Most of them Spider-Man sketches, a few that weren't necessarily Spider-Man, but it doesn't matter because it's amazing, absolutely amazing. And then to think how big of a piece of comic book history this is to then bring in the sketch cover as a regularly published thing is unreal.
Yeah, it's been a real boon to the industry for a lot of people, like individual talent, for the publishers, etc. That it's who knew, but that's what happened. That's the truth.
Yeah, and another thing is, these sketches are out there, you guys, and I imagine sometimes they'll sell in the secondary market. So be on the lookout for them because it's a big part of comic book history. And in my opinion, I think that there should be that intrinsic value on it, that history value, plus the art value, which is pretty amazing for what this was. So
I bid on one of those and I kept it, and it's by Luke Ross. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful pencil sketch of Spidey by Luke Ross.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, the kid of the group, and he seems like he's like everybody in comics' little brother from when we hear these stories. Ladies and gentlemen, Marat Mychaels. Marat, thanks for joining us, brother.
How you guys doing?
Hey,
Dude, thanks so much for hanging out, dude.
I know, my pleasure. I've been watching her now, so
That's cool. I don't know if Mike, did you share your one comic that you love and adore?
oh yeah, that's right.
Sure. I don't know if I would say I love and adore, but it does have a very it holds a high place in my memories. Like most of you guys, 7-Eleven was my first comic shop. In my neighborhood, 7-Eleven was maybe a quarter of a mile from my house. And I was the youngest of 5 children, and I was often tasked with going to 7-Eleven to pick up A, B, or C. Hey, my brothers and sisters would give me 25 cents and to grab them a Slurpee or this or that. Well, our 7-Eleven actually caught fire. my brother happened to be in the 7-Eleven at the time. I don't think he was responsible. I say I don't think, I don't know for sure, but he was playing pinball. But when they reopened the 7-Eleven, they kind of had a grand opening celebration, and it coincided with a Marvel giveaway. And so that's why this holds a high place in memory in my head, because there were balloons, there were like banners and flags. So this is not my first comic, but it is my first Marvel comic, 1981. It is a Marvel Comics collector's edition from 7-Eleven. I'm going to show it right here if you can see it.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
And this is, cool. I had to go back and rebuy this. I read the cover off of it. It is, as you would guess, it's rather silly in a lot of ways. It's not quite as bad as the Hostess ads, but 7-Eleven does hold a prominent place. Like everything happens at 7-Eleven. Yeah. You know, like, hey, you know, Spider-Man's taking Mary Jane to a date on 7-Eleven. So they get 7-Eleven in there a lot. But the story, it involves Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, Captain America, Spider-Woman versus Enchantress, the Wizard, the Rhino, and Trapster, who I believe was Paste Pot Pete before he was Trapster. I have no idea who drew it because they didn't give credits to the writer or the drawer. I heard somewhere that it was John Romita Sr., but I don't know. That seems kind of dicey for 1981. Yep. So that was my first Marvel comic, and again, that's why it holds a place in my memory, because of the event that I had. Before that, I did, you know, being 7-Eleven, holding that high regard, because my dad would go into 7-Eleven on his way home from work. He worked 2 jobs, and oftentimes he'd stop by, get a pack of cigarettes or whatever, and he'd grab a comic for me. And one of the comics that holds a high place in my memory there is Sergeant Rock. I believe it's 356, number 356. Sorry, I get the light here.
That's good. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And it's a Joe Kubert cover, which is awesome. And that's special to me because that's something that I shared with my dad. We didn't have a lot in common, but he would buy these comic books for me because he wanted to read them himself. So, like he was really into Sergeant Rock. So I had quite a few Sergeant Rock comics. And then later on got into Marvel, G.I. Joe, and then later X-Men. But those are 2 comics that I hold in high regard for my early memories.
Yeah. And you know what's great about that? You just talked about history there. People don't realize the first exclusives really came out in the 40s at grocery stores, and they would give out these little comic books, and it would be Reedies. Did it come out before the 40s?
Mm-hmm.
Jesse, don't forget the shoe promos, because you could get a kid.
But that was Buster Brown's, but that was the 60s and the 70s.
No, there were some late 40s and early 50s shoe promos.
Okay. But yeah, just so the public knows that exclusives came out early in the 40s. And so to have an exclusive from 7-Eleven, that's like awesome.
It is cool.
It literally says you cannot sell this in the information and publishing information only to be given away by 7-Eleven, not for resale.
Wow.
So there's no price tag on it.
Yeah.
On the rare occasion on those types of promo books, sometimes on a given page, like the first page, you might get the initial of the artist.
Right.
Just initials.
Yeah, I looked. I'll look again. I heard somewhere John Romita Sr., but I'm not sure about that.
I was right, Jesse. I just looked it up. 1949 through 1954 was the Buster Brown shoe comic books.
Look up Shredded Wheats.
Shredded Wheats.
That's cool.
Mike, you know who did a lot of those promos, those Marvel promos, who did interior art, and it was Herb Trimp. He did a lot of interior art in those. So
it doesn't look like Herb Trimp.
Okay.
Because I'm familiar with his work.
See, that's actually an interesting period of time, because that's right before Neil Adams kind of got everybody to come into those little encampments and start getting the credits that they deserved, because they were freelancing this stuff out, and these guys didn't know they were getting taken for everything they were giving. So if that's like 76, Neil Adams was just seeing this stuff start happening at that time, and it's not until 78, 79 that he spun the industry around.
Yes, he did.
So that's kind of in the Wild West period of, comic art.
Yeah,
Talking
that
about Wild
80s
Wild West. Talking about Wild Wild West. You got Marat. What year was your first comic? Because we're probably older than your first comic.
Well, I was a little, Johnny come lately. I didn't really start collecting hardcore until 1980. It was I walked into a stand really looking for a toy comic called Crystar or Cristar,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Crystal Warrior,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden I saw X-Men 173 with Wolverine rushing action. And I bought that book and I went home and I reread it maybe 30 times. Stayed up till like 2 in the morning and that was it. Like, it was literally like, boom. I was completely enamored with comics from that point on. And lived in LA, grew up in LA. I used to go to the Golden Apple comic book store, which was iconic back in the 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
to get my trading cards. Like, I was into all the stuff. I loved like the cartoons, Spider-Man, His Amazing Friends, the Legion of Doom, Justice League stuff, the Super Friends, Thundar. I mean, I was obsessed with all that stuff, but I didn't really like the comics until I saw that X-73. And then the next day, I just started going to Golden Apple all the time. And after about 6 months, because we were poor, my family was poor, I got $1 a week for an allowance, which let me buy one comic book at 60 cents.
Right.
And then I buy 2 the following week because then I had $1.40. So like, I was kind of away. So after about 6 months, the assistant manager was like, I was on an 83. I was 11 years old. The assistant manager was like, "Hey kid, you want a job here?" And I was like, "Sure." He's like, "All right, bag and board for store credit." And I was in Nirvana. I was like, "Oh my God!" Like holy crap, Hey, I get to keep my $1. I was a chubby kid, so I get to keep my $1 for some hamburgers, and I still get comic books.
Yeah.
Win.
Heaven. The first comic that I remember seeing you work with Brian on was a comic that I purchased immediately when I saw it. It was for Emerald City Comic Con, and it was this amazing Lady Death. It was the Amazing Spider-Man 300 homage. And this cover is, I mean, just the green on it just immediately gravitates toward it. But it was such a cool book when it came out, and it seems like it's been, from there. What was the first book though that you guys worked on? Do you guys remember? Together?
It was the metal cover, right, Brian?
Yes, I think so. So, I mean, Marat and I really do go back probably two decades before that, just as friends and acquaintances. So we probably met sometime in the early 90s. We all lived in
93.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, we all lived in Southern California, and we were all, in our different ways, aspiring comics professionals. And there was this one Denny's in Hollywood where we would sort of meet up and just kind of talk about what we were trying to cook up. That's my recollection of it. And we had a mutual friend, a guy named Leonardo Jimenez, and who was quite a brilliant illustrator.
Yeah, he was fantastic.
Yep. So instead of a drink and draw, you had a Denny's and draw.
We did.
There you go.
It was a lot of shooting the shit.
And Jesse, you weren't invited because you were at Sizzler.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, the funny part that Marat brought up was the 60 cents demise for a comic book kid. So comics were 50 cents. So if you had $1, you got 2 comics. And I remember the day working in the store that comics came out for 60 cents, and the kid would walk in for $1 and he could only buy 1 book. It really changed the concept for youngins back in the day, that you had to work a little bit harder. You had to go mow one more lawn to get that extra 20 cents. Obviously, you're getting more for 20 cents for mowing the lawn. But that 60 cents really changed the dynamics on how you bought your books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think swinging back to the first work that I think Marat did on one of my creations, correct me if I'm wrong, dude, but didn't you do like a Dynamic Forces Lady Death cover in the late 90s, early 00s?
I worked for the other guy. and I might have done some covers.
Okay.
No.
Dude,
I
I'm
don't-
pretty
I don't
sure
even think
I think
I
you
did.
did a Dynamic Forces, but maybe that's lost to time. I don't know.
It might have been then. Yeah, it might have been a Dynamic Force one.
Yeah, you did this
I
beautiful,
remember,
just latest figure. She's holding a particular sword, and it's got a nice, simple background. However,
Yep.
probably the one that really has historical value is we did get together about, it was, gosh, I don't know how many years at this point, but I was in Vegas, and I was just shooting the shit with somebody about wanting to do the type of enhanced covers I would love to do. And I mentioned to this person, Jacob Stem, I said, it would be so cool to do a metal cover. And he just simply said, you know, like in a very deadpan manner, yeah, I can do that. And, you know, I didn't know really. So I floated him a couple files, including the original cover of Lady Death #3. And he produced the cover, you know, to spec, to size, and it worked. So that was the first one ever. So then we're like, oh, let's get going on this. And got together with Marat, who drew a beautiful cover, Lady Death, very ornate. And we interestingly published that one without color, or it was very, like, the color was very dry. So it was just ink, graphite, and we were just sort of playing with all the tonalities that we could with the metal. And I think the first edition was limited to 44 copies, instantaneous sellout, and then it's been rinse and repeat ever since. That's my recollection. How about yours, Marat?
Yeah, no, same thing. And then I remember you telling me, like, hey, you know, do it like this because this is going to be the first metal cover. And I was like, the hell's a metal cover? Like,
Right.
you know, how's it going to work? In my mind, I'm thinking like it's like cardstock foil, like it's going to be a super thick foil cover. But I'm like, you know, I'm just happy to be a Lady Death cover. So, you know, I'm like, Brian's giving me, you know.
And see that when I heard that Brian Pulido was going to do a metal cover, I just figured it was Brian doing the devil horn. Just on the cover, it's like Brian.
You got to go to Swornfest and watch him on stage if you want a good metal cover like Brian.
And that it is the true story
yeah.
that Jacob Stem could verify it. The first ever metal cover was published, manufactured by Fairy Metal Photography. Marat was the illustrator, and I was lucky enough to publish it. And since then, the whole industry is rising up around that.
Do you think they're rising up against it? I mean, do you think that's something that is happening
No,
right
I'm
now?
sorry. My languaging was wrong. It's like
Okay.
it risen up around it, I guess.
Okay. Yes. Because I think that has been one of the biggest things in comic books, you know, over the last 5 years is the metal cover, which again is pretty amazing that, you know, you guys had
But
your
it's
hand
also
in it.
ironic that as we've all gotten older, we just made all of our short boxes even heavier.
Dude, it's so true. I laugh, man. You go into a con, it's like, I complain that comics never get lighter to begin with and digital never really caught on. But like, yeah, you're right. We just like made it 3 times as heavy.
Right. So Marat, you know, about the last 7 years, you started collecting backwards, right? You started really getting into retro and vintage. Why did you all of a sudden switch to that?
Well, what happened was, I think it was like 2008 or 2009. I was living in Southern California and had a house fire. And my apartment burned down and my whole comic book collection burned down. And since I was a kid, so every book I ever had, gone. I knew I just wasn't going to be able to collect everything. It was probably 12 or 13 long boxes of books and a lot of expensive stuff. Also a lot of like obscure stuff that I loved as a kid. So I got everything in trade paperbacks. I mean, everything I could, I just kept buying in trade paperbacks because that was a lot more affordable. And, then after that, I kind of, as I started doing my own stuff, you know, getting my books that I published graded, I started getting into CGC stuff, slab stuff. And so, you know, I'm just going to start kind of collecting these key first appearances. And initially it was going to be, you know, books that were $200 or $300, and then steadily it grew. And then actually the book I bought tonight is Brian's Fault. So it's one of my favorite books in my collection. And it was, we were in San Jose. It was, I think it was called the Big Wow Comic Con when we were right next to each other.
Yeah.
And I was looking at a first appearance of The Punisher, and it was a 9.4, and it was a couple of $1,000s, which is a substantial amount of money. And I'm hemming and humming, and Brian's like, you know what? I take X amount of my earnings, and that's my plane. So he's like, if you can afford this, and this is, X amount, you should go get it. So, I was like, he's like the devil on my shoulder right now.
Right.
Angel's saying, go home and pay off some of your credit card bills. And here's Brian, like, you should do it. And so I went and I haggled with him a little bit. But the coolest thing about that is, so I buy this $2,000 comic book, and I wound up cracking it. And I got it signed by Stanley, John Romita, Len Wein before he passed away, Roy Thomas, and Gary Conway.
Wow.
And then it got pressed, and it came back in 9.6.
Oh!
Yeah, there you go.
Just the only one quintuple line in existence.
Wow.
So this is, I definitely had to share this book just because, Brian was kind of part of it.
That's cool.
And, it is. I have this, and I have Nightwing's one of my favorite characters, and I have a book signed by George Perez, Dick Giordano, and Marv Wolfman.
But that book is way more transcending than people give it credit for our generation. I just watched a video today, and Brian, you'll know who these people are, maybe some people in the audience, but Star Wars Theory and Drunk 3PO were at a comic convention, shopping for comics, and they're like, "Oh, let me see that one up there. Let me see that." Goes, "Which one is it?" Oh, and they bring down 129, and the guy's like, "Oh, let me buy that." And he's like, "Dude, I was gonna buy it." He goes, "Just shut up, I'm gonna buy it," and buys him a $3,000 and then hands it to him. He goes, "This is my gift to you."
Wow.
Wow.
And it's that's just one of those bonding comics, because I'm sitting here, I'm looking back there, you held yours up, I'm looking over here, I see it over here. You know what I'm saying? It's just one of those iconic books that we always dreamed about when we were reading Marvel Tales and we're seeing the reprint, or we're Bring On the Bad Guys, and we're seeing and you're that ingrained itself in an entire generation of comic kids 50 years ago. And then
you know what I think so important about that book and that character, and the reason why I love it so much is because the vigilante, vigilante is such a great archetype, right? It's the thing in writing and stories and movies and comics and any type of creation where they create a character that they make him, you don't like them, right? And you hate him, and then through that storyline he becomes your favorite character. He becomes the person you root for, whether it's
and you don't even find out who he is until a magazine later.
Yes.
Something very interesting. I was thinking about moments in time that kind of changed time. And Brian, you're going on, 50 years here. And you actually said at the beginning of the show, people signed inside the book.
Yeah.
When people started signing on covers, I remember my first reaction. How was your first reaction seeing someone actually doing that blasphemy signing on a cover?
I have a funny story. So when you say that, this is what comes up for me. So I'm starting to be a comics professional. We have Evil Ernie 1, 2, and 3 out, and Stephen Hughes and I are touring, so to speak, at different cons. And it was a transitionary period, and people still sometimes wanted them signed inside. But the funniest thing was people would come to have the book signed, and they would go, "Oh, you're the writer? Yeah, I don't want your signature." And they'd go for Steve's. So that happened too. So it was pretty funny. I think in the 90s, the image explosion kind of transitioned into signing on the front covers.
One of the cool things that you do, Brian, is that when you sign books, I've noticed you'll try and put it in an area where you don't want to take away from any of the art or anything.
That seems stands to reason. Yeah, I don't want to mess the art up. I respect it. I also
signature for a superstar that I've ever seen. Like, it's tiny. Sometimes people go, "Oh, this book's going to get double signed," and I'm like, "Where's Brian's signature?" And then they'll point it out on the cover. I was like, "Oh, there it is."
Sometimes I
I
flex.
tried it signing. I
Sometimes
try
I
to sign
flex.
smaller whenever when it's a Lady Death book. I'm like, I should never overshadow Brian, but sometimes it's like I need the magnifying glass.
Well, I think historically, and I'm trying to think, and my first 22 years, I probably wouldn't know too much about, but Brian might have been one of the first mass signers who was signing so many comics during that chaos year. I can't think of anybody that really signed massively.
Well, there was an era, like I remember, Dan Jurgens signing something crazy, like the rumor 75,000, Superman 75, something crazy. But I do remember doing a mass signing. Stephen Hughes and I, we offered it through Diamond, like Lady Death 2 #1, limited to 5,000, totally sold out. And then just sort of grappling with, well, okay, now we have to sign 5,000 books. How do you really do that? And, there was that era.
I've seen 10,000 on the Batman 600 or 500. The one that
500.
they literally bagged, and they had different autographs in each one. You could get a
500.
Bob Kane or.
Wow.
Yep. Speaking of that, of what you were talking about, Marat, here is that book that I own, and if you look here up by Lady Death, there's Brian's signature, and I had to search for it. You know what I mean?
Here it is.
Yeah.
You got to search for it.
Yeah, it's like really, really small there on the top, and I love that. I love that you guys that you do that, Brian. I think that's really cool. There's other artists and creators and writers that do that, and I really respect that when that happens, because I come from that world of collecting. When I was a kid, I was the first thing that I collected was sports cards. And I remember being a kid and being told, you don't get autographs on your cards. If you want to get a baseball player's autograph, you get it on the baseball with a ballpoint pen. You never get your cards autographed. And then that kind of flipped in the mid 90s, early 2000s. And I think that you kind of, like you guys are talking about, you saw that in comics where it flipped to the cover also, which is very interesting how that happens. It's very cyclical, how collecting works.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
excellent
I'm a huge fan of it personally. I mean, I know I just showed a book that's signed by 5 different creators, so it's a little hypocritical. But for the most part, I'm not a huge fan. I like my my books like signed the front page or left alone.
Yes.
So,
I guess the question is, did it make sense to you, Brian and Mike and Marat, when the first person came up and had a witness with them and said, "Hey, this is a witness. Where I'm CGC grading this." Did it change? Did something click in your head? Like, what is this?
I'll let Marat take this, because I think Marat really kind of mastered the game on this. Go, man.
I mean, when they here's my thing. It's like, whatever the fan wants is kind of, number one rule. Like, we're here to service our fans. Mm-hmm. So somebody came up, it's, like people ask me to do quotes now, and I'm like, I have the worst handwriting. I don't know why you would want me to write on your comic. Like, my handwriting sucks. It's they came up, they explained. It was, it was a little nerve-wracking in the beginning. I'm like, I'm going to ruin this guy's book, and then he's going to pay, X amount of dollars to get it encased and stuff. But you roll with it. You understand it's the way business was starting to go. And just eventually you become really comfortable with it, I think, and you just go, that's just part of what we do.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of like signature fees. At first it was like, oh my God, people are charging for signatures. And now it's like almost reversed. Like, if you tell people you'll sign some for free, they're like, oh my God, you're not going to charge me? Like, what's wrong with you? As things change and as, fans want new and different stuff, and they get accustomed to, new things, you just kind of roll with it. At least that's kind of been my attitude. And I think, CGC is, personally, I think CGC or CBCS is great for the industry, because there's some people that, look, you guys obviously know I do a book called Do You Poo, and it's had over 3,000 variant covers on it at this point. And, I get people all the time like, oh, I have a couple of hundred of your books. Oh, thanks, man.
I mean,
yeah, what's inside?
Do you have a new variant for Do You Poo coming out at San Diego? Cue, Brian.
I might have 20 new variants of San Diego because all the retailers I work with. But literally, people will like go. I am a hoe.
You gotta make that money, son.
I've been on the other side of it where I've struggled for 15 years. So,
Yeah, sure.
You know, when you
Overnight
catch lightning
sensation,
in a
right?
bottle- yeah, exactly. Overnight sensation after 20 years.
Yeah.
No, when you kind of connect with fans, you just keep giving them what they want. So, those that don't like it, don't buy it. That's all. It's like anything else. It's kind of my thing. I scroll on Facebook. If I see a post I don't like, I don't care whether it's comic book related, sports related, political. Like, if I don't like it, I don't agree with it, I just move on. I just keep scrolling. Like, I don't understand. Like, you need to know my opinion on everything and attitude. Like, no, you don't. I don't need to know everybody's opinion on everything, and they don't need to know mine.
I think
So,
that's I think that's a very interesting thing, because back in the day, one of the greatest things when I was growing up with some of my favorite bands, right, was that you didn't know what these guys looked like. I remember the first time I saw what the guys in Pink Floyd looked like, I was like, blown away. The first time I saw like what the guys in Tool looked like, or, and it was for the better when I didn't know back then, because it was so mysterious and it added to the lore. And I thought that was such a cool thing. You didn't have to know those things. You just, it made it better. And so sometimes, when you take that route, that's a good thing. It makes it, a little bit more mysterious.
That's a good question, though, Brian, because I know we've talked about this before, but when's the first time your picture showed up in Wizard magazine?
God, that's a good question. When did it? They did a feature article, and the premise was to be a self-publisher is insane.
Yep.
Yeah.
They came out and did a pro shoot of it, the whole thing. Myself, Steve, and Jensen, and I think it's funny, that whole theme is still the same. To be a self-publisher is insane. As Marat knows. It's that whole. I mean, I think we all benefited from the celebrification of comic creators, which I saw the image guys do just naturalistically, and I said, I want to do what they're doing. That makes sense to me.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
And I was a
crowdfunding too.
comic scripting, so I was right there with those guys. I was kind of the guy in the background, You had Image 7, and then here's my little chubby ass, back there try to get in other photos.
Marat, I found a copy of the old Extreme book. I think was it the Extreme book? Yeah, with all you guys in it. Yeah.
His Kung Fu.
Oh, that's the worst. So I'm going to tell this story before here. But so they came in, they brought in a photographer for those books. And the guy's like, I was a really shy kid, even in my, late teens, early 20s. And he's like, do some cool action poses, like superhero stuff. And I'm like, I don't do that. Like, that's not me.
Right.
And so he's like, well, do something. And I really nonchalantly, I'm like,
yeah.
And so, back then, you didn't have digital proofs. You had the little, the film. You had to look with basically your monocle and stuff. And so I remember being in Rob Liefeld's office, and he was like, which picture do you want to use? And I said, look, use anything you want except these right here. And Rob had been buddies for, a long time at that point. And of course, when the book comes out, he uses the exact picture that I hated the most.
Yeah.
And I have random friends in the group that literally they're not random friends. They're really good buddies of mine that randomly will just send me that picture, like once every 2-3 months. They'll just show up with like LOLs and ha-has.
The funny thing about it, and I don't want, anyways, the funny thing about it is I had seen that picture before I met Marat. And when I met Marat, I forgot where I met him. I mean, we're talking about 15 years ago. I walked away saying, I think that's got the guy with the Kung Fu Karate picture. And sure enough, it was, so very cool. Very cool, guys. Very good show.
Yeah.
A lot less hair.
Yeah.
A lot less hair.
Yeah.
Hey,
No, actually, Jesse, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go for it.
Oh, no, I was saying, I remember we met, Jesse. We met at the Phoenix Comic Con back when it was at the, in Mesa. It was the last one in Mesa. Yep, and that I met you for the first time.
Yep.
So
For fun, I would like, if I may, to share a couple of items. The first thing I would like to share is a comic that I love and adore is Commandy #1. So this particular copy is signed by Mike Royer. And the reason I love Commandy #1 is this has everything that I love in comics. It has a quest. It has a dystopian future where there's a single human being, in this case, Commandy, and he's always questing, and all his adversaries are a bunch of wonderful talking animals.
Yep.
I think even in the first issue, Kirby was kind enough to do a map of this.
Oh, I love that.
Earth AD, they call it, after disaster. See if I can find it. And what was neat about that is that map portended to the future of all the storylines. Let me see if they have it. Yeah. This is the little map that Kirby did. And it was so exciting because I was imagining, holy mackerel, that's all the different worlds that in areas that we're going to explore. And indeed, they did. Then finally, I would like to do this one, which is fun. This is a Captain America Sentinel of Liberty badge.
Wow.
So if you were lucky enough to read the early issues of Captain America, you would be invited to join the Sentinel of Liberties for something like a dime. Right. And in return, you'd get this original Sentinel of Liberty badge. And this is a reproduction. This is a actual a reproduction of a Sentinel of Liberty card.
Yeah.
And I have my own with it signed.
Wow.
It's not real. The badge is real. The card, if you get them on eBay, like a burnt up one with someone else's signature on, recently went for $3,600.
I was about to say, I think I saw that recently.
So now, let me ask you a question about Commandy. Did he ever find a shirt throughout his all that time?
You know, it's funny. I don't think he ever found a shirt. And if you're a Kirby nerd, so Commandy looks a lot like other Kirby characters, kind of looks like Thor, kind of looks like Captain Victory. And for fun, years ago, I decided to kind of read all of the Kirby blonde, long-haired characters as if they're one character. And like it's their various adventures. And it strangely kind of works.
Well, here you go, Brian. There you go. $3,700 on May 12th. It sold for.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it's crusty. Like the reverse is like someone's name on it, but yeah.
That's so cool. I love those type of things that makes that gives that history to comics that's so important. You know, we keep talking about that the history of comics is just as important as the current stuff, if not more important. So it's fun to talk about those things.
You know, that cover has always made me think of one of my favorite comics. I didn't discover that one until later, but one of the books that I loved when I was first coming up was John Byrne's Doomsday +1.
Yeah, Doomsday +1. It's amazing.
And he literally just rips that cover almost completely off.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun unknown series. That's another dystopian
really
future.
Is, but I read that cover to end almost probably weekly.
Yeah, fun story. Yeah, good stuff.
And then when I discovered Commandy, I'm like, what's this ripoff? And you're like,
well, Commandy winds up being a ripoff of Planet of the Apes, but it's perfectly fine. It's totally fine.
Brian, you talked about loving. You talked about loving the Kirby Fourth World stuff and the New God stuff. Did you happen to see the recent announcement from DC where Scott Snyder and Josh Williamson are going to be bringing back Darkseid as the big bad, and they're going to be keying in on him on a whole world building type thing?
The bigger question is it Darkseid or Darkseid?
I call him Darkseid.
Yeah, that is a big question. I know for me, I mispronounce so many of these characters. I call him Darkseid. That's it.
Yeah. So it's gonna be exciting, and I'm a huge fan of that too. Darkseid's one of my favorite villains, and
he's great.
it looks very interesting. So let's cross our fingers that they.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's a challenge. I've read when Simonson had a run on Orion, John Byrne did a New Gods run, even the Jerry Conway stuff. I read it all. There's just something really magical about the original material because it was so explosive in its creativity. Kirby would introduce stuff that he would never follow up on. It was just so packed with ideas, and that's part of what I really like about it. Now, even Keith Giffen had a nice run on Legion of Superheroes where they introduced Darkseid as the villain. Right. That was a really good storyline. So
yeah, the Darkness storyline.
Open-minded.
Yeah, I actually talked about that last night. That's my favorite Darkseid storyline. Is that Keith Giffen storyline and Legion of Superheroes? So good.
Cool.
Very
the
underrated.
Art is super cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. We have a week to go till San Diego, and the only person who is unable to go is Mike. The rest of us are all going to be there. It's probably one of the funnest things, and we talked about it very early with Jimmy and Billy also, where you guys talked about how great it is to go to these cons and see everybody. What are you guys looking forward to this year, Brian?
Man, I love it all. One of the neat things about San Diego is at a certain level, you just never know what's going to happen. Who you're going to run into. Someone's going to come over to you and say, like, a couple of years ago, it was like the guitar player for Testament came over. He's like, dude, I want to just let you know I love your stuff. I'm like, dude, I've loved your stuff for years too. So right. I think that's kind of fun. And all the things that kind of happen that you never planned. Like we have our plans, we'll be exhibiting and all that stuff. Come on down, get our exclusives. They're rad. But all the unknown stuff is kind of the most fun.
I agree. Marat, are you ready for it?
I think so. I don't think anybody's ever ready for it. I think just go and do it. I'm excited. I've been doing it since I was 15 years old. So I've been going to San Diego a long time. I missed a few years here and there, but I'm 52 now, so it's a lot of San Diegos. Yeah, it's gonna be a blast. It's always cool seeing people I haven't seen because I travel a lot of cons, so I see a lot of my friends in the industry, but some of them that don't. San Diego and New York Comic Con are always the two big shows that everybody always tries to attend, and so it's cool to see all those people. And I'm also like excited to. I'm trying not to, but I'm slowly being pulled into the original art. Market of everything, and I have a expensive taste, so I'm kind of excited even to go look through all the portfolios and all the walls of stuff I'll be able to afford, but just to stand near it is like I could stand next to a Picasso now, whatever, or a Banksy or that stuff like that, but I was like, if I stand next to a Frank Miller page or a John Byrne X-Men page, I'm gonna be like,
yes. Yeah.
Like, staring at it for half an hour and somebody's like, hey, you have to do you need to get back to your table or your booth or whatever. So I'm really excited about going to see that. There's always the original art. And I have a couple buddies that definitely buy the expensive stuff that, I'm just like, when they buy it, I was like, can I just hold it in my hand for like a second? So I help. That obviously, like, I'm still a huge fan, so it's seeing all the new stuff, whatever preview editions of stuff I haven't had a chance to read up on, or some new exclusives with some art that I'm excited about. That's always a blast, and then again, like Brian said, running into people who you don't know are fans of your work and you're like shocked by it. I always am, because I still feel like, the 12-year-old kid that works at the comic book store most of the time, where I'm like, I can't believe I've been doing this my whole life.
Right.
So it's cool. You meet celebrities, or you meet like, producers or Hollywood people who are like, oh yeah, I follow your stuff. And you're like, holy crap. Like, that's amazing. Like I, watch the show you produce, or, like I became buddies with a guy that now runs Apple TV, and I met him in San Diego like 20 years ago. So it's like, it's just cool to meet someone and see the trajectory of their career and what they're doing. And I'm like, dude, like I'll call him once in a while and I'll be like, I just watched this show. This is amazing, man. Like they're going to be a season 2 or 3, and so that's really cool. Meeting new people, and meeting people online and you've never met in person. That's also awesome. Like just to kind of have the human factor to it, I guess.
Yeah. Amen.
So yeah, it's always cool. And the fans.
Yeah.
It's always the fans. So.
Yeah. I think that's probably to me, that's one of the coolest things that both of you guys do. And you kind of hit on it earlier. We kind of barely hit on it, but how important it is to be engaging to those people that are coming up to you. You did that to Billy Tucci, and look where it led Brian. And, talk about that a little bit, how important that is as a creator. It is to speak to the fans and to, be engaging with them and to, make sure you're not, you're actually talking to them and looking at them and that type of thing.
Well, it's the whole deal. I mean, we say it all the time, and it's true. It's like our customer is our boss. And we're not really coming from a cynical point of view. That's really just how I see it. Also, if I can leave comics better every time, that's what I'm always trying to do. I'm always available to project creators for information about doing things like Kickstarter, or just trying to give somebody a leg up. I'm into that generally. I'm on a more positive element of my journey, trying to create a little fun and excitement, and that really is our mission. Although we do these crazy, diabolical, R-rated, insane comic books, really what our company about is spreading joy, fun, and excitement in the domain of rock and roll inspired comics. So when we are at the con, that's our agenda and our mission, to make everybody just their day a little brighter. And it's our business is kind of unusual because we are not technically performing artists, right? But so what I endeavor to do is just try to make it as fun of an experience as possible. Like I have a rule where it's like I got to be my best self soon as I'm in the zone. Like I'm in the city, I'm in the zone, because I don't know when I'm going to meet people, and I do. And I want them to have a positive experience. I've been on the other side and have had negative experiences. I don't actually mind that. It happens. But I do want people to have kind of a great experience. And it makes me feel good to make people feel good.
Yeah. And Brian he's the only creator I have seen do this. Brian spends all his time not behind his tables, he's in front of his tables. So his engagement aren't handshakes with people in between, right? So it allows the abilities for better pictures and better communications. He's able to approach these people. And I've stood by Brian thousands of times where he's seen people a mile away and always engaging them. And that's something very unique that almost I've never seen anybody else do. So
one thing I've noticed Brian do, and he does it very well, is when he meets someone, he will ask them their opinion on something. And I don't think it's something he plans, but if they have a rock t-shirt or if they're wearing anything, hey, what did you think of that movie? What did you think? I think that has a remarkable effect on people, that when this creator is asking what they think on something, you can tell they really appreciate that.
I mean, Brian, are we going to share that that's just an old Carney trick to get them into the group?
I don't know if it is or it isn't, but there you go.
But that's I do it every day as a salesman. You have to get on but the thing is you can't lie about that.
Yes. Right.
As a genuine human being, you have to pick out something that you can recognize, that you can create what I call cultural literacy with this individual.
Yeah.
And then once you do that, now we're talking on the same level. It's why we ask, what was your first comic? Where did you get your first comic?
Yeah,
what's a comic store? Because we're creating a cultural literacy with the get.
You bet. Yeah.
And then once we establish that, it opens up the entire process.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. I just want to finalize with this. This is my 39th year going to San Diego Con. Wow. And for me, it's about culture, tradition, and just knowing that you're part of something very special, very unique. You then go in. I'm then go hang out with Brian, and I'm then go see Marat, and I'm going to see my friends more than I'm going to, oh, what do you got to sell? And obviously I buy stuff, but that's not really why I'm going. It's this place to really be part of the culture and the tradition that comics brings. I don't care about all, San Diego Con's not about comics. Well, if you know the comic book industry, then it is about comics. Yeah. So I can't wait to do this. It's going to be fun. I tell you, honest truth, when I walk in, I'm the 12-year-old. And I walk in with the 12-year-old mindset. And it's like I walked in 39 years ago with the same mindset. So that's what San Diego is for me this year. So.
Nice.
Yeah. It's magical and electrifying. No matter what other people tell you, like, I don't know what people complain about it. Dude, it's the Super Bowl of comics. If you're there, it's a privilege. It continues to be magical, astounding, and wondrous. So that's just my view on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I tell everybody, like, if you're a comic fan, you have to go at least once in your life.
Yeah.
Like, it's a must. Yeah.
To me, I consider it the rules of Mecca. You must make a pilgrimage to it once if you want to consider yourself to be part of the holy empire.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yep. Well, one of the things that has been kind of a message throughout this whole thing has been, enjoying comics, how we've enjoyed them since we were kids, all the way to now. We're kind of kids, big kids in general, but also that community. And I think this is a really cool thing. And I just want to say to Brian and to Marat and to Mike and to Jesse and Dennis and Jimmy and Billy, thank you so much for coming over to the channel and spending this time and taking your time out of your week to do this here. It was absolutely a blast. And I couldn't have had more fun doing it. And I appreciate you guys. So anything else you guys want to say before we call it a night?
I just want to acknowledge Marat Mychaels for being a G. I respect his game madly.
Thank you, sir.
That's not, I don't say that out of a lot of people, but like I watch him like a hawk and I'm like nothing but respect.
I follow your game plan, Freddie.
And Marat, the only thing I don't respect about you is allowing Whatnot to install your Wi-Fi.
We'll get that figured out one of these days. One of these days. So, hey, Mike, thank you so much. Mike, thank you so much for joining, and it was very nice to meet you. And Brian and Marat have been on the channel.
Have we met before, Mike?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
You look familiar. That's what I was trying to figure out, but I can't remember.
I got one of those faces.
Yeah.
You're welcome anytime.
Yep.
Well, Brian, thank you, Jesse and Dennis, for your friendship. Thank you for pulling this together. Certainly a subject that is near and dear to all our hearts. So thank you for putting this together tonight. I really appreciate it.
All righty, you guys. Make sure you guys.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Okay.
Yeah, make sure you guys sub up, hit that like button. Make sure you guys stop by to say hi to these guys that are going to be in San Diego, and shout out to Sworn Nation. We're out. Peace.
We're out.